Hello and welcome to another episode of My Favourite Game from the Honest Football Podcast.
This week we're delighted to be joined by Chloe Beresford, a fantastic football writer who's editor-in-chief at Get Italian Football News, a hugely successful Italian football news website. She's also made guest appearances on the likes of 5 Live Sport, as well as being a regular pundit for the Serie A Show. She talks to us about growing up supporting Stockport County, as well as how she fell in love with Fiorentina. Chloe's got fantastic footballing knowledge and her work's well worth checking out, and you can find those in the description below. And don't forget, if you'd like to be part of this favourite game series, just give us a message at Honest Football 3. Okay, so I'm delighted to be joined by Chloe now, and I'll start as I always do, which is by asking people to go back all the way to the start of their footballing memories, whether it be playing or as a fan. What's the first moment of football you remember as a child?
I actually went to watch Manchester City with my dad. My great-grandfather actually played for Manchester City, so we went, and I think it was 1994, and they played Aston Villa. So we went, and I'd never really been that interested in football. I was sort of 10, 11 years old, never been interested in football before. And it didn't, to be honest, it didn't really grab me. I came out thinking, I'm not too keen on this. I think we were very high up and it seemed very impersonal.
Yeah.
And so after that, we actually got some free tickets with school to go to watch our local team, which is Stockport County.
Okay.
And we were sat quite low down, quite near the pitch on the side. And it was that moment when I absolutely fell in love with football. It was the noise of the ball being kicked, the shouts of the crowd. Yeah. The just that kind of, I guess, lower league atmosphere really, really grabbed me. And I think because, it was my local team, I felt engaged with it because the players came into school and offered these free tickets, and everything about it really just grabbed me.
That's brilliant. I mean, I guess it's the same for me as a Luton fan. It's one of those old style grounds where it's right next to the pitch. You can hear everything the players say, and it's just, you feel so much of a part of it on the pitch, don't you?
Absolutely. I've actually been to Luton when Stockport were promoted. They'd already been promoted, and I think they needed a result at Luton to be champions, but yeah. I think it was 97, okay. And but they drew 0-0, and I think Bury won, and they went up as champions. But it was still a good day out. It was still a really good day out.
Absolutely. And then I guess growing up through your adolescent years, what were your main memories around that sort of spell? I guess, did you follow Stockport then after that then?
Absolutely, yeah. We, me and my dad, we ended up getting a season ticket. And they had a juniors scheme whereby you used to pay for the coach to away matches, but they had a reciprocal deal where each club would give each other's juniors free tickets. So we used to get free tickets to the away matches. So we ended up pretty much going home and away, it was just absolutely brilliant. The sense of community of going on the coach with the same people, and it was absolutely brilliant. And at that time, Stockport County were really successful. They in 96-97, as I mentioned, they were promoted, but also they got to the semi-finals of the Coca-Cola Cup. Yeah. And they narrowly lost out to Middlesbrough in the semis. So, and they beat several Premier League teams along the way. So, as a young person, sort of 13 years old, I was just blown away. It was just magical times. It really was.
Absolutely. And then I guess growing up, Stockport have had a quite interesting last 20 years, I guess, compared to most clubs. I guess, again, they fall into a similar category to Luton in the way things went. How did you find that, and how was it following that sort of spell with such ridiculous ups and downs at times?
Difficult, to be honest. I mean, they won promotion in 2008 up to League One. Yeah. And then in less than 10 years, they found themselves not only non-league but down to the National League North. Yeah. And I actually couldn't face going to the matches, but a lot of the time when they were when it was things were so bad, because I felt like the heart and soul had been ripped out of the club. It wasn't the same anymore. Watching against these really tiny teams, I just couldn't face it. A lot of people were really loyal and they kept going, and I congratulate them for that. But for me, I don't know, something had been lost, and it's taken me a while, but I've gradually started to get back into it. I mean, they were promoted as champions last season, and they're now in the conference, as it was in the National League. So, things are starting to get better, and there's good people at the club. But there was such a lot of awful mismanagement that caused those problems that it was just awful.
I guess that's the hardest thing when you're a Football League club for so long, and then you suddenly find yourself going to away games at leisure centres and things like that. It's a little bit different, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, County had never been out of the Football League until they were relegated, so it was a massive, massive change. And you're getting sort of 5, 6, 7. I'm exaggerating, but away fans coming to a stadium like Edgeley Park, which is a 12,000 seater. It is just a bit silly, really.
And then I guess moving on, and it will kind of link in towards the work that you're doing now, you've sort of got quite involved in Italian football. I'm interested to know how this came about.
Well, I mentioned before my great-granddad played for Manchester City in the 1930s. And he was largely a reserve team player. He did play a couple of first team matches, but they won the FA Cup in 1934, and he was a reserve. He didn't play in the cup final.
Okay.
But after that, which is obviously it's quite unusual to think of now, but they went on a post-season tour that was arranged by Thomas Cook, and it because obviously they were the sponsors then, and they went to they went to France and Italy and played several of teams on the continent. And when they played in Italy against Fiorentina, some of the players were away on international duty, and etc. etc. And my great granddad got his chance, and he started in this match. The whole of the Italy World Cup squad that would go on later that month to actually win the World Cup were sitting on the sidelines watching. That included Giuseppe Meazza and all these great players. And he actually scored a goal in that match. So
brilliant!
It was just the stuff of absolute dreams, really. And so we decided that we wanted to go and see the stadium where he'd played, because it's the same stadium. So we went across to Fiorentina, and it just snowballed, really. We made friends there. They were so interested about why we were there, because they don't, the Milan clubs and Juve got a lot of tourists from abroad, but Fiorentina don't always get very many foreign people. So they were so interested in us, and then we just kept going back, and eventually I always wanted to be a football writer, but never really got to it in the traditional route. But I started just blogging, really, and then it's all come from that. And I loved Italian football in the 90s on the television.
Yeah, it was brilliant. It was free to air to watch, wasn't it?
Exactly. So it's just come around in a circle, and I love it.
That's great. And then I guess talking a little bit more about the work in detail that you do now. Obviously, you've got you edit Get Italian Football News, which we use quite a lot. It's a really good website, actually, really good up-to-date information. And then you also work quite a lot on the Serie A Show, which we've listened to quite a lot recently, because we had Nima on as well, who obviously is a pundit on there too. So talk to us a little bit about those bits of work and what you do. A chance to plug yourself as well.
Well, Get Italian Football News came about quite recently. They approached me and asked me if I'd like to sort of take charge. And I really admire what they've done with the Get French Football News. They've built that up to be really huge, through really just writing the quality news stories. There's a lot of rubbish out there, just to generate clicks, and
absolutely.
So what we try and do is we try and put out there for people who perhaps support a team in England and have an interest in foreign football, the real quality news stories that they can rely on and that they can trust to be accurate. So that's what we do with that. And the Serie A Show, about 18 months ago, John Solano, who does the AS Roma Press website, came up with the idea that we wanted to talk about Serie A, and we asked Nima as well, and the three of us we just kind of click. I don't know, it wasn't kind of on purpose, but as soon as we started doing it, it really flowed very well. We're all very passionate about Serie A. And we just have a really, really great laugh. It's we don't take it too seriously, but equally, because we're all very knowledgeable, the content is good. So I think it's quite a good balance, really.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's the same as I said to Nima, really. The one thing that we really like about that show, and it's something we've always tried to mirror in ours, is so often politics gets dragged into football, particularly in mainstream media outlets. It's so nice to have people that want to talk about the football first, which makes such a difference. And a lot of fans, I think, crave that, which is why social media in certain areas has become so popular for football in that regard.
Yeah, I agree, definitely.
And then I guess moving on to the main part of the episode, which is obviously the name of the series, which is favourite games. I'm sure you've probably got a lot to choose from, particularly with two clubs being followed as well. And obviously you've worked in media outlets as well, which means you will have access to games. But on to the big question. What's your favourite game and what's the reason for it as well? And you can have a few notable mentions if you want to.
Okay, I'll start with a Stockport County one. In the first proper season we started going, which was 95-96, they drew Everton in the third round of the FA Cup. Okay. And Everton had actually won the FA Cup the year before. They had names like Duncan Ferguson and Andrei Konchelskis, and we didn't actually go to Goodison Park, but County got a 2-2 draw at Goodison Park, and me and my dad listened on the radio. And so because I think we had season tickets by then, we managed to get tickets for the replay.
Yeah.
And County were losing 2-1. And in the 88th minute, I think, Alan Armstrong, our striker, who was my absolute hero, went and scored and equalised for 2-2. And it was just the most incredible moment. But then, to my horror, absolute horror, straight from the kickoff, Everton went down the other end and scored and made it 3-2, and that was that. And honestly, I cried and I cried and I cried, and my dad just didn't know how to cope with it, and he said, "Come on, let's go to the pub." So we went to the pub, and he bought me a packet of salt and vinegar crisps and a Coke, and I think that's the only way he knew how to cheer me up. But that actually taught me that football makes you feel, that it's all about the emotion, and from then on, it was. I was just addicted to football. Yeah. But the main game I actually want to talk about is the first time I went to Fiorentina, which was in 2014. And they were playing against Inter, who they weren't doing massively well at the time. They had Walter Mazzari as the coach. Yeah. But, growing up, having watched Football Italia and stuff, I'd already been to an Italian match, but I'd never been to Fiorentina at home. Okay. And seeing them play against a team like Inter, who I'd watched through the years do so well and everything, was just amazing. And I think walking out, when you go into the Curva Fiesole at Fiorentina, there's sort of, you go onto a concourse and there's a little gap, and you can see the gap between the bottom tier and the top tier. And I could just catch a glimpse through this little gap of the pitch and the fans, and the excitement was just, I couldn't tell you how excited I was. And we walked out into these stands, and there was just a sea of people, and it took my breath away, honestly. And they did a special, what they call a choreography, was a special display with the flags and everything. And they don't do that every game, so we were really lucky to see that in our first game. And then Fiorentina actually went and beat Inter 3-0, and they just really, really outplayed them. And And for that to be your first game and to be in the curva with people who've sort of accepted you as one of their own at a place where they don't really like outsiders, because they like to keep the passion very strong. And it was amazing. You know, I'd been all over England watching English football, and you know, I'd seen Stockport County beat Manchester City at Main Road, you know, really, really amazing times that you couldn't imagine now, you know, considering where they are. But that was just like my childhood of watching Italian football. It just all opened up to me, and you know, I'll never forget it. And there was some great goals too. Juan Cuadrado, who now plays for Juve, he scored a belting goal. And Nenad Tomovic, who is like, anybody who watches Italian football knows he's like the most terrible defender you can imagine. It was his one moment of glory. He scored a brilliant goal, and then he ran off into the crowd, and he sort of half pulled his shirt off, and they were all like slapping his back, and he got all red hand marks on his back. So, you know, it was really an excellent experience, and something that I'll never forget. Even though now I've been to San Siro, I've been all over Italy watching Italian football, and I still have to pinch myself sometimes, but that really was the start of it, and it was completely magical, really.
And that, I guess both of those games actually are really good ones for what we look for in here, because so often it's so more about the occasion or the achievement rather than the actual game itself. So particularly with the Stockport one, that sort of classic romance of the FA Cup, a lower league side at home to a Premier League team, a side that had just won the FA Cup, is something that obviously there's a lot of debate about now and it getting undervalued, but it's still, I can say as a Luton fan, a few years back we had one away at Norwich, it's still one of the best moments you can have as a football fan in England for me.
Definitely.
And then I guess in Italy as well, that sort of realisation of a childhood dream, watching that football growing up and then being able to actually go and be there for the first moment must be the most incredible moment, really. Yeah,
it really was, and like I say, I still keep having to pinch myself, really, but you know, I think the message is to just, for people to just follow the passion, whatever it is, whatever sets you on fire, that to just keep following it, and eventually something good will come of it. And you know, that's really what's happened to me. I've never you know, I've never really stopped loving the game, and you know, now I get to work in it, which is just amazing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the perfect sentiment to end on, a brilliant message. And of course, well done on your much deserved success, and we wish you all the best in the future in all of your work. Thank you for joining us on the podcast for this favourite game series. If you want to follow Chloe, there's links to her Twitter bio and all of her work websites in the comments, in the description down below. Make sure you give her a follow. It's brilliant content. And thanks for joining us again, Chloe. We do appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me.